Is the Civilian Police Review Board regular meeting. We have quite a bit on the agenda that we put out. I always welcome when you have issues and that you think of it, let's put that on the agenda, we'll put it for next time kind of thing, but we need to cross-check each other. In this case, we'll call it to order by getting cameras here. Okay. Would you do the roll, please?
Tony Allegretti.
Here, present.
Ricardo Diaz.
Here.
Scott Dossett.
Here.
Katrina Kendall. Anthony Rice.
Here.
Excellent. Well, as a first announcement and where we are in quorum, Daryl sent in his resignation. He's had a lot of things going on, but health issues especially have really, he needs to pare down. So we're sad to see him go, but it does change the configuration. I mean, the direct one, of course, we'll miss him and hope he's doing well and keep in touch. But it does mean that we have one less member in the committee, and when we get to announcements, we can go over that and make a plug. But Katrina would be the only member, present member that is not here, so we do have a quorum. We'll read through because I think it was very true that was pulled up. So we have the regular members of the panel on our main panel list. We have the city of Urbana, the one that hosts the meeting. Lamont Peppers is here. Tamara Corbin is here on the panelist list. And then in attendees, we have Christopher Hansen, meeting, Molly, Tracy Chong, UPTV operator, and Urbana person. So I believe two of those, well, at least one of them is the technical support from Jason. So we'll get to, as we go through the agenda, just be aware of everybody in the room because we can't see each other. We're still in COVID. I am at the city building. So having a quorum, is there anything else on the agenda that looks?
I think Katrina just showed up.
Excellent. Katrina, you here? Yes, she's logging in. Excellent. Katrina, welcome.
Hi, sorry about that.
You're here. That's important. So we're just looking at the agenda. Let me share it to make sure everybody has it. We receive it in the packet. It is available for download, but darn it, it is just a pain to have to deal with not paper, or at least in the same room so we can see each other. We're starting, we're going into a quest of new businesses that are not necessarily so new, but we're getting close to moving on to some unfinished business. We have a bunch of minutes to approve, and since today we have everybody, it would be a good day to approve them. Any changes? Okay, if not, then let's go through these minutes, approve them, and make sure that we're all aware of everything that happened here. The regular meeting is the one that has more substance to it on the 27th, and the other special meetings are hearing meetings, which are short as to the public. So I'll be very happy to take a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes for the special meeting of January the 15th.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Katrina. Let's have the vote. Tamara, you get a lot of work today.
Tony Allegretti.
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz.
Yes?
Scott Dossett.
Yes.
Katrina Kendall.
Yes.
Anthony Rice.
Yes.
Okay, so that carries and they're approved. I'll entertain a motion for the regular meeting on January 27th.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second from Katrina. And so let's take another vote.
Tony Allegretti,
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Katrina Kendall,
Yes.
Anthony Rice.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that's our first 2 minutes, and then we had the special session on the 12th.
We approve the special meeting minutes for February the 12th.
Thank you.
Second.
Moves, Katrina seconds. Let's do another vote.
Tony Allegretti,
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Katrina Kendall,
Yes.
Anthony Rice.
Yes.
Thank you very much. They are also approved then. If, well, people can pull up where we were on the 27th of January, and we probably will go through that a little bit, but let's do some public participation, and we'll do it as we've been doing, which is anyone who raises their hand, and that we'll do. We'll have another one of those at the end. So it's a pseudo dialogue, but we welcome people raising their hand to speak and start us out with some of them. Christopher Hansen is first. So go ahead, Christopher.
I'm hearing a loud crunching noise. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you, Christopher. Somebody's getting to their chips.
That would be me.
I see you. Okay, so I guess I wanted to mostly talk about confidentiality, and like this has been a problem that I've been bringing up with the CPRB for more than a year now. And I remember first talking about it with Mikhail. He was the chair, and the question was, what can the board members talk about in terms of what happened in a closed session? And then we had this issue where the city administrator said she would sanction board members for speaking about closed sessions, and I tried over and over and over to get an explanation on what the meaning of that. And then the conclusion from the current chair and everyone now was that you guys weren't supposed to talk about anything that went into closed session. But then at your last meeting, Mr. Dossett spent several minutes talking about something that happened in closed session. It was in regards to a statement about refusing to accept any new evidence in a hearing. And so I'm wondering, is this just something where the public officials can kind of make exceptions to policy whenever it pleases them, and we don't really honor it except for when it's beneficial to the public officials? I'm just really confused there. I would also urge Mr. Dossett, if he has access to the video of the recording of the session that he made mention to go revisit that, because his memory is in error. And then also we had an incident recently where it seems like some city staff gave access to the CPRB complaint log to a prior city council member, Esther Pat, so that she could use it to, publicly criticize and lambast someone for submitting police complaints. And, Miss Pat has is entitled to run her, smear campaign against people, but I hope this board realizes how damaging it is to your process. Whether the criticism is right or wrong isn't really the issue. The issue is that now the public has been given the impression that when they submit police complaints, the city will then selectively give access to that data so that that member of the public can be retaliated against. So, and that's where we're at right now. And that's the real deal. That's what happened. So I don't really know how we recover from this. I thought we were making a little bit of progress. I mean, as a reminder, when I got interested in the CPRB a year and a half, or I don't know if it was 2 years ago, something like that, this board hadn't submitted its reports in 5 or 6 years. This board could not see copies of police complaints that were being submitted. The CPRB ordinance was being violated in so many different ways, it was hard to count. So I thought we were making a progress on a number of those items, and I know that some interesting tactics have been used by complainants to get your attention and get compliance from the city, but I think it was working. A lot of things that were way out of alignment are back in alignment, but now I feel like everything's probably been wrecked. I don't know who in their right mind would submit a police complaint right now, knowing the kind of retaliation that the city is going to engage in. So that's really disappointing. So I'm not sure how to fix that, but I don't know. It's just all really disappointing at this point. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
You're muted, Ricardo.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm frustrated too with some of that. I'd like to respond to it. I don't see any other hands up. So we'll switch over to comments on if the board would like to make any comments on what Mr. Hanson just said. And we'll have the public input at the end too. There is,
Ricardo, I'll just say I personally was not approached and did not disclose any of these. I'm aware of the email I think that Mr. Hanson's referring to. You know, that if that is a violation of the CPRB ordinance or any other ordinance, that it should be investigated and possibly a complaint be filed about it. You know, I don't know if our board is the appropriate spot for it, but other city officials should look into that. And, you know, seeing that if it's a violation of someone's privacy and if it does reduce people complaining about CPR or about police conduct because they're going to be outed on a fairly wide red email list, I think that's deplorable.
Yeah, all I can say, Tony, is I've asked for information from city staff about this incident and haven't received anything back so far this week. So
I don't know if we can, I mean, do we have access? Do we know who accesses the database?
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be the first thing. And, you know, and we could, you know, brainstorm this a little bit more, you know, maybe as a new business item or something like that to think through. You know, we argued for the portal so that people wouldn't literally have to go into the city building to be able to view complaints. And certainly with city staff's help, we've improved the accessibility and the quality of that content. But there are still problems with the way the portal works. For example, if anybody's read the complaint, the first one we have for 2021, pretty heavily redacted even from our side. And so we've got, you know, we could probably spend some time talking and thinking about the portal and what we'd like. And of course, one of those is, and most germane in this context, is access. You know, who has access and when? You know, I consider to be the stuff that goes in there to be really super under lock and key, and don't share it with anyone. So I don't know how apparently a count was made about who filed complaints and during what period. And I think we certainly need to get to the answer of that, because I certainly, you know, I agree with Mr. Hanson completely. You know, my belief in this process is that it's a private one, not a public one. So.
Agreed. And put you on the spot, put us on the spot, because there's who has access to the portal is already been a request put in. I have asked who has access and if there is a log. Most of these systems will have some kind of log. Unfortunately, when in this case is, you know, a long period in which this could have been, but it doesn't matter. I have put in that request to it. I'm following up. Carol is not here today to respond directly, but I did put it on her queue so that she would give us a formal response, but also what information does the city hold for that? But I would want to point us on the spot. I think Tony did put it on. I have not been requested either of any of this information, and nor would I discuss it or disclose it. It's just not, I mean, that's part of our confidentiality as we walk in. So can I be assured by all members of the board that they have not shared this information with anybody outside this circle?
Yes, I have not shared any information about any of our meetings with anyone. I did get a chance to thoroughly read the email, and there were some things in there that I felt on behalf was kind of accusatory. But since we have clarified that part about the PRB members, and that takes us out of the accusatory statement that is in the email.
Nor have I shared any information.
Okay, so the board members haven't shared the information. So someone did, and I have put in the formal request to find out who has or who. Unfortunately, we can't chase it directly anymore. That is, we don't generate the system and we don't keep logs on the system, but we will follow up with those people that do. So that's the first. I'm very glad, Christopher, that you have brought it forward because it does deserve the attention. Filing is already it's a big deal for people to do, and to have any of their information put out. I mean, there's a lot of care that goes into it, from redactions to other things. But I do want to address the second point brought up, and that is our closed sessions.
Ricardo?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, let me interrupt you a little bit. I know Lamond is in the meeting with us, and so Lamond, can I ask you, not necessarily whether you're trying to work at a resolution about this issue, about the confidentiality, but is there anything that we can do to explain what we see as our problem to you while we're together now?
Well, this is the confidentiality issue tonight. This is the first I've heard of it. As far as there being a breach, I have not shared any information, but then I'm not part of the closed sessions. So I would ask that the board would give us at the city time to further look into this and investigate it and respond when Carol is able to be present with us.
Right, okay, all right. Well, I emailed Carol, the mayor, and Ricardo Sunday. So, hopefully that gets on people's radar screen.
Right. So I think we have put it on them. We need a report back. In fact, the follow-up should be this week as to what they're doing, because that's a decision rather than the actual doing, and they may have something more. I think you're right. Lamond has not been part of the email. Actually, I can't verify that, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't know enough right now to give us an answer. It's painful. We have made progress on several fronts, and this one is not. Anyway, it does hurt, and we don't move on from it. We have to come back with a good answer for that. But there was a second point about confidentiality that came up, and I think that it's good also putting on the table, and that is closed session and threats. We have threats for revealing. We have discussed and have from the state level clarification that a closed session is what it is, and that when we vote in closed session for things as leaving closed session or whatever else, it stays in the closed session. It's in the recording. The only one to look at that recording is at the state level PAC. So for me, that's as close as it can be in terms of things that happen there and things that are discussed, not only with statements made by the person making the appeal, but also the police or the city responding to. We don't delve in those details. We did, I think, at the last meeting, had two different additions to it. And no, they are not for selectively giving access to anybody for anything. But I think that we started with clarifications, because one of the things that does happen in hearings is that we get to both clarify with each other what the issues are, where people eventually vote in the public session, but what issues were raised there that will improve our process. And so as you noticed at the last session, once we voted, I asked for people to give comments, and then I gave comments that I will put in for, I'm required by ordinance to provide a comment. Doesn't say very much about it, but to give, in this case, to the police chief, especially because our last vote was in not supporting his decision. So I believe that we are being consistent, at least in this group, that we're gonna do, and we will keep people's names out of things. And that when we go into closed session, as was clarified, we were not threatened, but we are under agreement when we join the board that whatever happens there stays in there. In generalities, we have spoken about lessons learned, but I hope, and I think we're being consistent with that goal being what about this. I do want to move to the rest of the agenda, but today's, well, this thing that has happened, it's wrong, and it shouldn't have been done by anybody. And I'm glad it's not the board that has shared that. There is damage both to the board and to individuals. And so I don't yet know. I have, can't take back out of it information, confidential information, once it's been out, fortunately. But we do state that it is improper, wrong, and we will come back and report. I just worked too hard. Anyway, so that's from public comment. We do have other things that are unfinished that we need to deal with, an unfinished business from the agenda. 5A is the status of complaints and appeals, and then B is the status of the annual report. Scott, you probably are best to talk about the annual report, and I will pull up the numbers to report back on appeals and complaints. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we're slowly making progress. I did a long request for some more kind of graphical information spinning out of the spreadsheets that we have. You know, what kind of complaint is it? The demographics involved. There was no taser section. So I'm going to approach Assistant Chief Searles to see whether he'll let me use some of the information that we did for the big compendium report to the City Council. And, you know, I guess I'll volunteer to try to beat out the draft of the taser section. I was unclear whether the rest of the board was sent that draft or not. Did you guys get a draft of the annual report? Yep.
I don't think so.
I don't remember seeing it.
Okay, so we're still trying to pull major sections together and provide some detail so that citizens that read it can, kind of see trends through years. I'm hoping, that we can get this done still in the spring.
I agree. I mean, that's a worthy goal. You have done the bulk of it already, Scott, and that we did see. What we haven't seen is the formatted report and this section of the tasers yet. It was sent to you and me, and the list that you gave of additions, I think, have been channeled to and assigned out. So before we send it out to the rest of the board, we're trying to verify that, well, the information is correct. And that was tedious to do, Scott, but I think our first meeting on this was sometime in the fall, or I remember sitting over at your house. But as you pulled out those numbers and put them in categories, to make it more understandable, the graphs and that kind of stuff is being built upon. And then we'll circulate it to the board, make sure that it's accurate, and then for comments, for readability, and then we'll finish by making it public. So it's got at least one other iteration for the information, in this case for tasers, and then some graphs that have been asked to put in there. I think your goal, Scott, of making it as look like the previous reports, even though it's a multi-year one, I think is a good idea, and taking the time to make sure that the record is not.
Yeah, well, what I'm attempting to do is to put together a format that hopefully in future years literally would be linked from spreadsheets back to another annual report. So in these days, you needn't, recreate a pie chart every time if you're collecting the same data. And in a trend analysis, of course, that's even more important. So what I'm trying to do is to, and I think I've got cooperation, at least with, one or two of the kind of statistical and programming people at the city building, that we literally have a format where we can drop numbers into it and it will start filling in the report for 2022, kind of automatically. So that's my goal. Another outstanding issue that we're going to face, and this is as good a time as any to bring it up, is that in the past, the first 5 years of reports had pictures. So, CPRB members will have to, discuss and elect whether or not they want photos of them to appear. And, in the past, there's been a short bio. Just a couple of sentences. And so, we'll have to do some of those kind of things. And once you guys have got the report in hand and you can see kind of what the nuts and bolts of the thing is, and I think it'll be pretty easy to work through those kind of things. And I don't have real strong feelings about whether a picture of me appears in the report or not, So.
You of all people, your picture has to be there, Scott. Everybody else we can blur out, but.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, thank you. So it's coming. The answer to the question is, where is it? It is in the hands of processing. It's still got some back and forth, and then it'll get to the rest of the board, hopefully in this next little cycle. As far as complaints and just an update on that, we did have 92 official complaints in 2020. Both in a composition of the form complaints and then others that came in and got incorporated with an R as to retroactive, but it's 64 plus 28 labeled with R. This year to date, January, February, there has been one complaint. I invite everybody to look at it. Coming back to confidentiality, we are probably the holders of the full picture as much as it can get. That is, whatever we see redacted we can request to see in a complaint and certainly by appeal. And again, confidentiality applies. But when the complaint gets to appeal, we also get to see well, any police reports that have been generated, the investigation, and certainly the complainant's view of their evidence. So in a way, we have one complaint formally. There are probably many other places in which people want to react to police interventions. And so we encourage people to send it in. A clarification that we started on last time is who has, how are complaints taken? We have voted that the police through their window at the building do not take reports anymore. They have to be taken through the Human Relations Office or directly to us. And I want to bring that up because we don't yet have a procedure. We voted on it. We said we can take it. We modified the form as to what counted as to, I forget what the language was, but basically it didn't have to be notarized anymore, but we are to take it. So be aware that somebody may send you a report right now because we don't have procedure and we need to establish procedure in our rule book. I think Tony Allegrady, you were the last one that read that procedure book, but we need to, add with comments on it. That's one of the sections we need to add. How do people file reports directly to us? We already know that there's an HRO way of doing it. And I think that I learned over the last month that it is important for that taking in. Megan, before she left and went back to teaching school, I think she made a good point that language and accessibility for filing a report needed to be improved also. So it's on our docket. I say it now, but that's where we're going to go to in a new business in a little bit. So recommendations for changing of structure and what goes to reforming of ordinance. So anyway, so those are the numbers up to date. I think it catches us up as to where we are. We will continue doing hearings and we'll come back to those dates in a bit, but I want you to look ahead and make sure that the dates are clear. For appeals, that would be either March 12th and March 19th are the ones that there are resources available right now, but I want you to look at your calendars, and when we get to announcements, everyone that's involved can say that if they're available still, so that we can nail them down. It could be both, but we need to pick at least one of those for March hearing. Okay. So that closes for me then that unfinished business as far as information. I want to come now to, unless there's any discussion anymore, to come to the new business because there's lots here. Okay. All right. So if you look at these points, planning session and then discussion of changes, administrative review, and then enforcement, use of force enforcement section. These items were put forward. The first one is one that we discussed probably in an October meeting, which was how do we handle the proposals, the document that was put together by several residents. And so we decided that we would take it in chunks, and we made 3 approaches to it. Items that can be handled within the ordinance, items that would change the ordinance, and then items that would change the structure. We had a listening session for the first 2, and we are at the phase of do we and how do we take ideas on changing the format and the structure of the board. Right now, we are a board that receives and looks at complaints, looks for patterns, reacts, we receive appeals, and we do tasers, taser discharges, and we look at the unholstering one. We voted last year to look at when it was actually activated. And as far as public meetings, we have access to all taser usage. And to me, looking at the big structure, there have been many suggestions already brought in, but I don't want to go there yet until we decide what we do with the collection of information that we've done, because that also kind of affects what kind of structure, if any, changes we are looking at. I talked too long, sorry. I was trying to lay it out into the pieces. We've done the two. We've got this pending one, but it's big, and it's maybe appropriate that it's big recommendations, but I don't feel like I have been ready yet as to what the options are, given what we've learned over the last 2 meetings. Comments?
Well, I was just going to make a comment. I'm thinking particularly that, you know, Anthony being pretty new to the board, I don't know whether you've had a chance to fish around, Anthony, in the NACOLE, NACOLE, that stands for the National Association of Civilian Law Enforcement, Oversight of Civilian Law Enforcement. And that there are a couple of different models that they talk about there. And here in Urbana, we've got a relatively sort of, you might say, light duty one that's kind of review only. And that there are other models that enhance the responsibility and probably the funding and probably the intensity of oversight. And so as we took this input from the community, you know, we tried to bucket those into these 3 categories that Ricardo was talking about. So as long as he and I are talking about the same thing, the next chunk we have, the last thing we have to talk about really is maybe some of the most interesting stuff. And that is understanding how our board is structured, how are other boards structured, and should the citizens of Urbana decide that they want a different review model, one that might be more of an auditor, a more supported board with investigative personnel, let's say, make sure that the community understands kind of what the ramifications of that are. So that's kind of where we're headed with this. And
I understood.
I don't know whether you and I had ever had a chance to talk about it. So I just wanted to stop briefly there.
I have not had any access with that.
Yeah.
And I'd be very interested in taking a look.
Yeah. Well,
so that I could start to understand a little bit more about that.
Sure. If you want to just Google NACOLE, what we'll get to is this National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I do a lot of webinar training with them. The city's compensated me for a couple of like all day sessions and a couple of, you know, $15 sessions I've done on my own, but it's a really good way to get a grasp of what's going on in the rest of the country in terms of these models and stuff like that. So NACO is a cool thing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So given, Scott, you've sat through those. I almost went to the conference 2-3 years back, because they do have an annual conference, and talking to other people that are doing this is good because the models are out and they're each representing a slightly different version of it. The city has been encouraging for us to learn those, but when it comes to as a group, what do we do and what our learning is, it seems to me like minimum, I think it was one of the trainings that we saw what the 3 or 4 models are. We never got to recommendation because they were off the table. It's not in our, it is, we wouldn't be making the final decision of where the structure is or what it could be. It would go back to city council, but city council would, I hope they would want input from us on that. So I feel like we should be educated enough to either validate that what we have is what we joined is what we want to keep on having, or if we would want to make a proposal to make changes to it, whether it's radical changes or just tweaks to the present one. Either way, it goes to the second section, which is what goes to city council for ordinance. See, the first section was what can we do within the ordinance? Second was what changes of the present model go that we would want to tweak. And the third one is that we want to dispense with the second one altogether and start over. So I want to put that forward. I want to deal with the next two issues that that were put in the agenda, and then I want to come back to this A, and maybe by then we have recommendations as to how we want to do it. Because I feel like the next 2-3 issues actually relate to one of these 3 buckets. Okay? So let me I'm gonna share my screen again. But darn it, the screen got complicated. Here it is. So I don't talk in the abstract. So we're on 6 new business, and therefore we would be looking at, if you notice, the way we sequenced it was, let's talk planning session as to what we're gonna do. We'll come back to A, 6A. Let's talk for B, C, and D a little bit just to contextualize, not only Tony, but the rest of us, because it's been a little while. And Katrina's always got a lot to say about these points, so I'm gonna call her up. Just checking my info. 6B.
Well, you want me to go?
Yeah, please.
Okay,
I think
yeah.
you're the one who put this one on the agenda.
Yeah, this was my ad, and it's something that I've actually been thinking about for years in terms of the ordinance. I know that this puts us, right now inside the ordinance, and I didn't pull it up. We can look at it. It's 19 dash something. There are 2 categories of exclusions. People with felonies and people with past police department service. And I'd like for us to consider eliminating those 2 exclusions. And the logic, briefly kind of goes, why exclude people who know more, probably the most, about the criminal justice system and the biases that it may include? I personally believe that somebody who, has a felony and does whatever is the prerequisite penalty for that felony should become a full-fledged member of society. And so that's kind of the motivator there. We know the collective bargaining agreement specifically mentions felons. And although I wasn't there when the original language for the ordinance was hammered out, I've got a feeling that when the bargaining got really kind of down to it, people were saying, well, if we can't have felons, then if you're an ex-cop, you can't serve. And that was a decision that was made 14 years ago, and I think it's relevant for us to try to visit it now. So at the end of this process and some discussion, I'm liable to make a motion that would be something like the CPRB refers to the City Council that in the context of the collective bargaining agreement that the exclusion for felons be removed. Now, there's a lot downhill from that. First of all, we may not agree. You guys may think, well, if you have a felony, you shouldn't serve on the board. But of course, we're just advising the City Council and staff in this context, and they then have to go out and do their own collective bargaining agreement with the Fraternal Order of the Police And so it's simply a way that if the board agrees, we could cue to staff and the council that it's our belief that that felonies shouldn't be excluded from potential membership on the board. You know, there's a lot of mid ground here. Not super familiar with felonies or the legal system, but I know there are classes of felonies. So you might say, well, you know, if you did a violent felony, like a class 1 or 2, maybe that person you don't want to have on your board. So I'm just kind of trying to introduce the idea so that we can discuss it. Obviously, we have a problem filling positions on the board, but it's, in my mind, it's more an issue of fairness. Just because you've interacted with the legal system to the extent that you've been charged and convicted of a felony, which some people do because they give incorrect and false names when first approached by an officer. My understanding is that can be a class 4 felony in the state of Illinois. So I'm walking through Crystal Lake Park at the age of 19. A cop comes up to me and asks me for ID or to identify myself, and I say, my name is Mickey Mouse. You know, fast forward 20 years later, I'm excluded from, you know, presentation on this board. So anyway, that's kind of the argument in a nutshell. So.
Thank you, Scott. Can I want to bounce this as a back and forth that is supposed, but I think I would like somebody to take the position of questioning Scott in the favorable for bringing this up, and another person to ask questions in the negative. That is, it's not a good idea to bring it's not a good idea to disqualify people with a felony from serving on the board. And somebody suggesting and asking Scott's friendly questions, anything more that might clarify it. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be your position, but I think we have to clarify it, because right now the ordinance does have an exclusion of anyone with a felony conviction, or anyone who is or who has worked for law enforcement. So in a nutshell, 2 classes of people are excluded from serving on the board. And since we do have a brand new position open, we have 2 openings, I think your argument when you're bringing it up is very timely. Does anybody want to take up either side, even if it's supposed?
This is Katrina. I agree with Scott in regards to, he said if someone committed his example was, when you're young and you're 19 and you do some things, you're not the same person that you were from 19 to an adult. Your paths are totally different. So I think excluding someone based on something that they did in the past, and maybe there has to be maybe like a time limit, maybe not like a fresh felon like in the last 3-4 years, but if something happened 15 to 20 years ago and you just didn't expunge it off your record, and it's something simple, like Scott said, of giving a false name, then I don't think that should exclude you from being on any board.
Thank you. Anyone?
What about?
This is a hard position, but you're the lawyer, Tony, so maybe you can.
I can play devil's advocate.
Thank you.
What about? I'm just thinking of a crime of moral turpitude. Cashing bad checks, or a financial crime, maybe a theft. Where someone may be predisposed to not being honest, or a crime of honesty. I think that may be more of a concern than a violent felony. Especially with, what we've heard this today from Mr. Hansen about disclosure of complaint information of people who have complained. That's we're dealing with that now. Do we want someone on this board who is going to say on the record, I didn't have anything to do with it, but we know that they've got crimes of dishonesty in their past that may call into question whether or not what they're telling us is the truth. I mean, that would be used against somebody in court to challenge their credibility. I like Katrina's idea of the time limit. I think something you've done when you're in your teens, 20s, maybe even 30s. I don't know. I'll throw myself in there. Maybe different. Yeah, maybe different than when you hit your later years. So I think the time limit may be something that is could be used. But I don't know if a blanket just any violent felony would disqualify you from something. I mean, if you get up to the more serious levels of felony, I don't know if we're going to find those individuals trying to be on this board. And if they did, they may be in the position where it's been 20 or 30 years since that incident occurred. They have served their time. And I can, I am pretty sure that everyone would agree on this board that if you've done serious time for a serious felony, you're going to come out a different person. And whether or not, you're going to come out a different person, hopefully, someone that's put all that in your past and may be able to actually be a contributing member to a board like this. But I would have more of an issue if someone had, 8 prior misdemeanor thefts on their background serving on the board than I would, someone with an aggravated battery, which you can be charged in Illinois. This is, kind of backing on what Scott's talking about. It's very easy to be charged with a felony, even a violent felony that may not, when you dig into it, be as bad as it sounds on paper.
So question to you three, because you're getting into that. What's if there was a felon that someone did, let's say they beat up another person recently, they went to court, they got charged, they were guilty, okay, and whatever happened after that, there's different punishments, whatever else. But if it happened 3 years ago, how can that disqualify? Given your experience now handling hearings and seeing what this job is, why wouldn't we want that point of view on the board?
You're talking about the time limit specifically?
Well, I'm saying both the violence or the seriousness of a felony and the time, because if it was violent and it was 20 years ago, as Katrina said, what does it matter today, right? The person probably has changed quite a bit. We all have changed in the last 20 years. You hit puberty. I'm talking about you, Tony, because you're young. But even on the seriousness of the violence, it seems to me like we haven't handled cases of that sort, complaints. But who better than to have empathy to say, in the worst of circumstance, the cop was manhandling me and I got charged and I got a felony out of that. And this person is being handled like I was and I should, right? So that's a type of case. On the other side, it may be just somebody who has a deep empathy or somebody who got caught in the wrong situation and says, there are ways to handle this, and this person didn't, but their complaint is valid. I was not a goody two shoes, but I'm trying to think. I have spent one day in jail, but of the stuff that I did, it doesn't really matter. But it did make me a different person, having been in those shoes. I'm just trying to figure out. But let me argue then for the other one too. What of a police officer's training, especially if they're retired, but even recent, what would disqualify them from helping us make a decision in the cases that get brought before us?
For me, I guess it would depend on what type of policeman they were. And I know that's a broad area of a range. If they were an impartial person, maybe, because, living in this town my whole life, you hear an officer and you're like, oh. And if it was one of those that it's like, oh, then what could they bring? Have they changed from when they had that, oh, mentality from years ago? And like you said, everybody does change. But if throughout the course of your time as a police officer, every interaction that you see, whether it's you hear it in the street, you read it, it's negative, 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 and then they decide to retire, is that someone we want on the board without more questions? I would have to ask. I would be one of those that said, you have this reputation of this for years and years around shame, what's going to be different now? Because now you're the same person, but you're just retired.
Yeah, you're still the same person. And you're very sympathetic to maybe inappropriate behavior by police, right? But
that's true.
So let me push that. Let's say that happens. Right now, it's the mayor who receives the applications and appoints people to this board. We were all been approved by. I got renewed last year under Mayor Marlin. Probably Scott, you too. Are you still Laurel? I don't know.
I don't know.
But chances are, right now we have been approved. Our application or renewal was approved by Mayor Marlin. We are under the term that we were appointed. We can resign. I don't know if she can remove us. That's a question I would have. I need to write that one down. I don't think, I haven't seen anything that says we could vote somebody out. But I have learned over the last few months that if I were, I'll put me on it, boogeyman in this case. If I were trained in police work and I was a nasty cop out there on the street, and we were sitting in some kind of hearing, you guys will vote me out in a minute. That is, whatever I put out as a decision, as a vote, you guys would outvote me in a second. Not, you wouldn't kick me off the board if you couldn't, but your votes would override mine.
Well, yeah, I mean, in essence, that's kind of been always my one of my rationales for pleas of diversity of the board. Whether or not somebody says exactly what the mayor wants to hear, although I'm not accusing any bias there, or misstates, or has things that they've done, kind of boils down to her decision. But for these two classes of people, we absolutely just say no. I mean, you can't do that.
You don't have a chance.
They don't have a chance to.
Right.
I just, for the life of me, I just can't understand why, given the fact that we have a pretty fine filter in the mayor, or let's say the executive of the city of Urbana, why we keep these two exclusions. It's saying to many people in our community that we don't want input from you on this board. And I think that's wrong.
I think to argue against allowing former police is, we're hearing the police side of the case in every complaint. So do we need them on a board that's supposed to be composed of civilians to be on that board? We're gonna hear what the police have to say already. And just because they're retired, every retired officer I know still has that badge, and they still have, they still carry their firearm as if they were still police. We're hearing that side of the story already, I guess. And I don't know if we need it on the board. And I guess the concern would be is that the board gets packed with ex-police. And then I'm not saying from this mayor or any, prior, but what prevents them from, packing the board in that.
So you're arguing that it would be too much sympathy. They could get stacked with too much sympathy it wouldn't be very good review if they're already sympathetic.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. whereas with people with prior felonies, you know, I don't think we have that concern that the mayor is going to be, or an executive is going to look to pack this board with a bunch of, you know, to removing the kind of negative connotation, ex-felons with the board. And further, I think this kind of, I was thinking about just now, you know, people who are put through the criminal system, we know that there's bias in that. So it's by preventing people with criminal felonies to serve on this board, we're perpetuating, or we're diversifying the board in that way. You know, it's not directly, but indirectly, we're allowing that to happen.
So I want to close this one for now, because as you can see, we're starting to get into the ordinance, but maybe even the structure of what this board does by dealing with this question. To be fair as to what we're doing is, one, this was decided probably with a lot of fights when the CPRB was initiated. As I look at the contract, July 1, 17 to July 30, 2020, or June 30, 2020, the contract between the city and the police union. They had an official name, but that's what it is. Section 22.1, they talk about us as the board, and it says the city at its sole discretion and without further negotiation may adopt and maintain a civilian police review board. If the city enacts it, the city agrees that the resulting board shall adhere to certain policies and procedures set up here. And it comes up. These are what it says. Police officers under A, 22.2A. Police officers subject to a CPRB. Actually, let me share that so you guys can see it. Not listening. Police officers subject to the CPRB proceedings shall not be required to appear before the CPRB. Their appearance shall be optional. However, should a police officer appear before the CPRB, that officer does not waive his or her rights to the law of disciplinary act in a CPRB proceeding. So if they come between us, they're still protected by this law. B, a complaint brought against a police officer by a member of the public shall be investigated by the police department in accordance with department policy. And C, the results of the police department investigation will be shared with the CPRB. However, CPRB members shall maintain confidentiality of any and all officer records, files, and medical information shared with us. So this is an agreement between the city and the police. Right now, they are not with a contract with each other. As far as I know, this one gets extended until they either vote down or not the next contract. I know that the negotiation is open, and of course, it is very touchy. Whatever we say here does bear on it somewhat, in that we're not the ones signing this contract, but if we decide to press on a particular side of this and go to city council, the city is bound by it and they'll have their fight ready for them, or not. I mean, the union can change its mind too. But I also want to present to you this, and where is it?
Well, Ricardo, I tell you, I'm going to official for a second to a motion that the Civilian Police Review Board advise to the Urbana City Council that the exclusion of potential board members because of past felonies are please be removed.
I second.
All right. So Scott made a motion, Katrina and Tony seconded. So now in the order of things, we would have discussion about the motion,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So about the motion specifically, where are you guys? Any comments?
I'm in agreement that a person that has, let's say, served or been deemed felon can grow as a human and bring some validity to the things that they've undergone potentially, and or situations that maybe they weren't actually involved with, but maybe have seen, to see certain things and not be able to have a say is an issue. We just talked about it last week with 2 weeks ago with a bystander standing on the curb and witnessing police activity. And said officer came up, questioned person. Person really didn't have any input, but still and yet they were observant of everything that transpired. No need for a statement from this person, but continued on with, well, this is the 50th time that Hanson has done this. This is the 60th time that Hanson's done this. But point being made is you have to give back to society the opportunity to, I don't know if you want to call it redeem yourself, but to contribute. Mm-hmm. And everybody that grows, oftentimes, most definitely with the youth that I know of, always tries to give back to the community. And if you learn something by way of a harsh reality and you can offer up a better direction for somebody, I don't know why we wouldn't accept it. And that's just my thought process on it.
I think you're saying you support the motion for these. I do. You know, this tenant.
I do.
Aid. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on the motion?
I'd support it. Just maybe to clarify that we're just talking about the felony portion, not the.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Cop portion.
Motion is for that. And I noticed, Scott, about the motion, it's only for the removal of this class of people, or removing the exclusion, but you did not set a time limit as was discussed earlier. And so we're in that period where we can comment on the motion in particular. You proposed removal altogether.
Removal of the felony exclusion. Currently the ordinance reads, no person with a criminal felony conviction or plea shall be eligible to serve on the CPRB. So that is section, I guess I could do a friendly amendment that under section 19-22, item C be removed from the qualifications of membership. That's the one I just read.
Yeah. All right. I want to not play devil's advocate at all, but to put down forward the email that you guys received is the MOU that was signed by the city and the union, the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP, that clarifies that this email is an MOU that clarifies what was signed in the contract. I mean, I want to read enough of it so that you all everybody gets the sense of where we're delving. It is the intent of this letter to address specific FOB concerns over the creation of the CPRB without limiting the city's management rights and the city's right to legislate matters of public safety and accountability to the public as it deems appropriate. The parties agree that the structure and authority of the CPRB is exclusively the management prerogative of the city's corporate authorities. provided that the CPRB does not affect Article 22 of the agreement or the disciplinary provisions contained within the agreement. Article 22 is what I read to you a few minutes ago. There are certain CPRB issues which are not included in the collective bargaining agreement, the contract, named agreement, because the city believes that they are matters of inherent management rights that are not mandatory subjects of bargaining. Those issues include the composition of the CPRB and its powers and duties. Nevertheless, without waiving its position as to these issues, the city has agreed to provide the following written assurances regarding the structure and provisions of the CPRB, which will be incorporated into the final ordinance that constitutes us. A, no person convicted of a felony shall be eligible for appointment to the CPRB. And then the rest relate to some of the other stuff that we did. But that one stands out as the number one. And I think because if we vote this motion forward, we are putting our opinion in the ring, but this is a signed agreement that holds, and the city will change it under the order of well, I was going to say the mayor, but no, I think it has to be city council. Otherwise, this stands. So we could vote one thing, but this agreement stands until something else is agreed upon. See what I mean?
Oh, I'm under no illusion that this board has a lot of throw weight to begin with, right? I mean, we make recommendations to the mayor about every hearing that we have, but I think it's also our duty and responsibility to look at what's happening in our community and act accordingly, and that's all I'm doing by making the motion.
Okay.
You know, it's way out of my pay grade, man. I'm kicking it upstairs.
Well, no, I mean, you're working for free, so we could double your salary and still be safe. But I guess the reason I'm putting it that way is because we have to understand that even if this lowly position, our opinion is, and when we vote it through as a motion or not, it is a statement. And honestly, big changes begin with statements of people willing to put forward. So anyway, that's the discussion part, unless anybody else has any more discussion on the motion before we vote on it. Okay, so let's then have a vote. Tamara, your evening is great.
Can I just clarify to make sure I get this right?
Yeah.
So Scott, you amended your original motion?
Well, I guess I called it a friendly amendment, but what I really did, Tamara, is to cite the specific area in the ordinance that I'm referring to. It's section 19-22, point C.
Gotcha, okay.
And I think we all understand, right, board members, that that's where we're at with that. So we're talking specifically about the criminal felony conviction or plea eligibility right now.
So your motion is to strike that section of the ordinance.
Right.
Okay.
All
You got
right,
it,
Tony Allegretti,
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Katrina Kendall,
Yes.
Anthony Rice,
Yes.
Okay, so motion passes, is approved by this board with the implications. I think we haven't done this, but I think that we need to assign ourselves so when we produce these motions that we go put them before the council. So I need a party of, let's say, 2 to attend city council meeting and to put forward to them our decisions as they happen and in the context of that we're working on further changes. You know what I mean? Because the next two that we're going to discuss are procedurally are related.
Sure. I mean, I'll zoom in.
Okay.
Do we know when that is, or?
Well, it's every Monday except the 5th. We'd have to have staff find us time on an agenda because I don't think we want to do this in public input. We want to, we want an agenda item. So
Yeah. So it would be on a Monday, not the first Monday of the following month, let's say. And you don't have to stay for the full thing because they do, you think we're boring. There are times at which it gets really, really specific, and I'm glad that they're willing to do it.
So, Lamond, is that something you can help us with to get on the agenda for a council meeting?
What we can do is I can touch base with Carol and with Kate. I do not do the agendas for the city council.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm just thinking if you could help us from the building, that would be nice.
Yeah, I can touch base with them, and then I can reply with an email to you all on what we need to do moving forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll help out on that.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Scott. You guys are in charge of going there and reporting. So hereby, let's put this on our next regular meeting agenda. That is going to be on March the 24th to report back wherever we are, just to report back on that visit to council. Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sharing. Did I begin to share? Let me share back the agenda again. Because as you see under new business, we have related items as far as procedure. So we have done 6B, which is discussing these changes, and now as a vote, sending to city council and visiting them. I imagine there is no vote to remove that line that speaks of police experience. Okay, so
well, I put that one in too, so I guess I'll respond that I think I heard enough pushback on that during discussion that I don't want to make a motion about it. So
okay, so no motion is there. I think that I want to put forward that to me, all points of view should be at the table, and so I don't know how to limit some of what we said, but I am not uncomfortable with everyone being part of this board because I've seen the way that the 4 to 5 can vote and outweigh one person's influence. But in any case, we'll leave 6B as is. If we go to 6C, is a proposal that is not necessarily new, but it is one of the things that has been discussed floating for quite a while, which is, as you've seen the cases in the hearing, there are times at which the complaint is not necessarily related to us or a sworn officer. And so it does not fit the ordinance directly, and we have no mechanism for sorting them except as they've come along and putting them by date and grouping them as we have. Did I represent that correctly, Scott?
well, yeah, that's a start. My core on this can be found in section 1927 of our ordinance. And it says just the first two items, the first one item, the CPRB shall maintain a central registry of complaints. And I think that makes it incumbent upon us to get kind of involved in the complete process. We've worked for the last several months to try to get the submission of complaint forms away from the front desk there. so that they're not submitted to UPD anymore. And in my mind, trying to work through that was not because of any lack of trust about UPD, or, you know, although there'll be pushback about this, the way complaints have been processed in the past. But I just don't think it should be their job. And one of the reasons is because that they shouldn't be responsible for kind of the administrative oversight of the way the system works. They're a key part of that, obviously. I mean, it's a civilian police review board. But Ricardo has mentioned that there are a couple of categories that, you know, not infrequently complaints are made in which, you know, they just don't need to go to UPD. Probably more important and you know, I guess more honestly, given the experience that we have in 2020, is that the ordinance gives us, and I've said this in open meeting before, the ordinance gives us no way to protect the system from abuse by complaint. So if a cop speeds down my street or is rolling a little bit faster than I think he is, or should be, I can submit a complaint to the CPRB through the HRO, and immediately assume that that's going to be an appealable complaint. Now we're on, you know, to try to understand or represent both sides of the case. If that cop is going down Elm Street at 80 miles an hour without his lights on, that could be a problem. So there's gray room here. But right now, the ability to take those complaints and compartmentalize them in other than an complaint to appeal system doesn't exist. And I'm of the opinion that the board needs that capability, that within the HREO or the HRO and CPRB, that we should be able to filter these systems. That would have to be a transparent process. Those would have to be reported. And that actually gets us to a place where I want us to be, where we're less of an appeals board and more of a complaint response board, because I really think that's the true power that the CPRB has. And so those are some of my thoughts about you know, what Ricardo started.
Wow. So once again, we come back to what is the structure of the board and what is it that we handle. The ordinance presently gives us pretty narrow parts that we handle. And while I got lost a little bit, Scott, as you were talking, but what the part that I hung on to there towards the end is that there would be a filter. And then you went on to transparency, and I think you're right there. Whatever we set up has to be efficient enough to take care of addressing the public's need to complain, but it also needs to be efficient enough that we can get to that and other things that this board would do. And right now, by definition, ordinance, the definition, there are certain things in which we delve into, but we don't have instruction on handling every complaint.
Well, we do have instruction about handling every complaint. And the instruction that the ordinance gives is that every complaint can be turned into an appeal, which means we go through the process that you've all witnessed with 4-hour meetings of this board, you know, at least monthly at this point in time, which I think for complaints of substance, we should do. And I realize, you know, one person's garbage is another person's treasure, right? So this is why, I mean, I'm not prepared to make any kind of motion at all about this, but I think it's something that we should actively be considering. My suggestions are that people, closely read sections 1928, which already need some editing because there's language in there about the police department receiving complaints. And the sections that have to do with section 19-32 is the appeal process, and that we think about how a fair way that we can give the HRO, the CPRB, maybe a fixed representative of a small committee, the ability to triage these complaints when they come in. Now, the accusation is going to be made, which I entirely reject, that people don't already complain to the board because they don't believe that the board does anything. If you had reviewed as many complaints and as many responses by the chief after tens of hours in some cases of investigation by lieutenants and sergeants and meetings with patrol officers, you would know that that's just not the case. The average of a dozen complaints or so that we normally receive for the board are fully responded to, and citizens, I think, are given really good service by this board and staff and UPD. So I don't accept the assertion that any kind of a filter in the system will make it less likely that people will file complaints. In fact, if we are not forced to deal with the cop rolled through an intersection somewhere, then we can get down to the nitty-gritty of the complaints that we have. And so I would ask board members, how often have they in the last 4 months opened up the portal and looked at complaints that are totally unique, that aren't part of appeals, complaints that have just been made by citizens, and how often have you had the opportunity to try to get inside that person's complaint and then try to respond to it and imagine how the board might respond to the community in cases. And I think what we're seeing is that because of the tsunami of complaints and appeals that we've got from 2020, we're not serving the average citizens of Urbana. So as opposed to the argument that a filter means fewer complaints, fewer processing, worse service, I think a filter gives us a better process, better service, better conclusions.
Thank you, Scott. Your intent in bringing it up today is as an item of discussion. As I think I heard you say, you have no motion
Right. No.
yet, but you almost said, I might have heard you wrong, that your intent is to refer it to the appropriate reviewer.
No. Sorry. I mean, there's a lot of threads going in here. No, if we develop an administrative review process, then we have to decide what that's going to look like. I mean, I can imagine what that process should look like, but I mean, it's going to be up to all of us and staff to develop that.
Okay. So I might have replied something that wasn't there. That is, you would want us to look at a process, but within this board first. Or is that too narrow in the interpretation of what you said?
Well, no, I think, I mean, we serve under the pleasure of the mayor and with the, wonderful support of staff, including the people that are with us today. So, I'm just hoping that we can kick around ideas. If people have questions from me about what I mean about the statements I've made, that we can talk about that. Okay. And then I'm sure when we get to public participation, hopefully citizens will pile on and we'll hear some things from them.
Okay.
Scott, are you saying, you're not saying you want to limit the ability to complain or file a complaint? You're talking about diverting after that point,
right?
Like almost either splitting the jurisdiction of the appeal from full-blown CPRB hearing to maybe like the equivalent of an administrative law judge, that it's one person hearing one complaint as opposed to a decision by committee vote that we normally do in an appeal.
Yeah, I don't know what an administrative law judge does.
It's like if you're challenging like a traffic ticket or something, or in front of the Secretary of State, it's made by one person as opposed to a vote by committee. So there's a lot less time involved.
Yeah, for example, we've had this big issue of FOIA. You know, if somebody complains to the CPRB about the fact that they couldn't get information about FOIA, and there's this whole storm of things going on, and we spend precious time trying to figure out what we have to do with that. The other big category that you see, and when we get the reports done, you'll see that they account to a not unsizable percentage of complaints through the years are ones that have to do with parking personnel. They're not uniformed officers. We have got complaints that basically deal, and the one I'm thinking of right now from about 15 or 16, really had to do with a county jurisdiction about a potential property crime. It got way complicated. And it just wasn't ever going to be in the purview of this board to look at. So how we work through the details of that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here and a lot of work that needs to be done to the ordinance. But I assure you, my intent is not to forestall or eliminate complaints, but actually to allow us to focus on the complaints that will help us best help our community.
Yeah. I wonder if, and I don't know if this is the right time to discuss this, but if we're talking, if there's a complaint that kind of, doesn't, or is passing the smell test, that it's that would make it an administrative review or something that the full board is not going to hear. Maybe maybe we do something to where it's assigned on a rotating basis to one member of the board, and then that's then reviewed by the chair or something like that, to kind of, I don't know, I'm just kind of spitballing what that would look like, because obviously if there's a complaint about it being diverted, how do we deal with that appeal of the diversion, I guess? And so you're going to want to have some oversight from an individual member. Maybe the chair does that, and then, but I mean, that sounds like, that we'd have to change the ordinance to do this.
Yeah.
So actually, that's where I wanted to head because of time, not because it's not important enough. You're proposing, I think, not a structural change, but a change of the ordinance such that we would do this. I'm not even sure if we need an ordinance change for this kind of assignment of the complaints. But it strikes me that in terms of the three buckets that we talked about initially, it's on the more towards the left than towards the right. The structural changes versus things we can do within the ordinance. At most, it's a change of the ordinance, but it's not a change of structure. We would still be fielding the complaints and fielding the appeals, correct?
Well, I think you're talking about a structural change, and that's why I referenced those sections of the ordinance specifically. And I think, members will just have to read that and see what they think about that.
All right. So can we table then further discussion to come back for people to read and maybe even prepare a presentation as to where we are and what could be done?
Sure. If anybody else has any questions or comments, I'd like to hear them now. But I'm done.
All right. Well, we'll center and assign everybody to read up a little bit on this because it is it does impact our efficiency.
Sorry, Ricardo, I don't mean
Go
to.
ahead.
You're maybe talking about working into our policies and procedures as opposed to the ordinance.
I'm just saying that I don't see anything that would bar us right now from doing that.
The only reason I'm asking you now is because, I mean, I think we kind of got into the weeds with the firsthand account and trying to make our own interpretation of what the ordinance says. And if we do that here, like, I mean, misconduct in the complaint section of the ordinance, that's not defined. So we can do this again, and maybe try and, you know, work within the ordinance, but I don't know where we're going to get. I like your idea. I'm just wondering.
I'm just saying, if, and we're not antagonistic to the city council, but where they haven't defined and there's an opening, we can put it forward
Sure.
and start doing. If they dislike it, then they have to define it and change the ordinance. Correct?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Okay. I mean, that's the difference between a legislative body and the executive side. In this case, we would be more on the judicial side if you wanted to break it up that way, but we have to operate in some way. And if it's not defined for us, then we start. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm going to argue the other side of that, because I think the will of the people of the city of Urbana is best reflected not through policies and procedures, but through the ordinance, which their elected representatives are responsible for. And I do think in this case that we're talking about a significant administrative and structural change to the way the board works. Unless you're going to get into the weeds about this just down the road somewhere. So.
Okay, so I'm going to say that we will table this to learn more and to think it through more, but we're not killing it. In fact, we can move it to old business if you like for our next agenda. I want to move on to 6D. There being no action taken that needs to be done. I want to move to 6D because I think it's the converse in terms of process. The use of force policy, to give a quick rundown, has happened as a change probably for the last year. The use of force policy by the Urbana police. It's gone through listening sessions, you know, both a proposal, a discussion, and then a rewriting, and then listening sessions. And right now there is a proposed use of force policy that is by the process outside of us. That is, it's going to be decided, as Scott said so nicely, by the elected representatives of the voice of the people. However, we, as the board that is affected on the as to the appeal process for the use of force, we may end up with complaints and appeals that are related to the use of force, because we are the ones that deal with was the policy adhered to. However, the use of force policy also has its own internal review process, if you will. The city of Urbana has been, is not new to this, and I would say they were probably on forefront as to what to do with use of force. And the national scene, while we're in the part of the nation, we have been hopefully not as egregiously bad as the others. I would say that, not hopefully, but it's true. I have not seen all the junk that has gone on nationally, locally. But I want to make sure that as we go through that and we say, well, we're mostly out of that discussion, we're not. So any comments on that? Some of you have been to listening session. You have probably been written to by members of the community about it. We can choose to put forward an opinion or changes. What do you think?
I still haven't read enough about HB 3653, the new criminal justice and police reform bill that Pritzker just signed. But as I read summaries about that in the News Gazette, it seems as if certification, use of force, although I'm confused by the language, there's a lot to learn there. And of course, Monday night, the city council passed a resolution about de-escalation. So I'm not sure where we need to be in that discussion right now, given all of these moving parts.
So that's why I'm bringing it up to you, because I'd rather it be, I mean, I've certainly had discussions with ACLU, or, the beginning of it. I've seen what they put out with, not the 10 principles, I forget what they're calling, 10 agreements.
10 principles.
10 principles, yeah. What I'm asking you is, do you feel that we need to weigh in as a board? Or are we already participating in the process, either through another organization, you guys wear many hats, or as individuals?
I don't feel like we have to or should.
Okay. Does anybody else? Is anybody involved enough that they would say, and the CPRB does need to weigh in because it's gonna go one way or the other, whichever way?
I mean, the board's already taken a stand. I mean, in open meetings, when this came up with Carol, wow, I don't know, 8 months ago, 9 months ago, the idea of a civilian member of the use of force committee, which currently doesn't have one, was brought up, and input to staff was provided in that way. So,
all right. Well, if there is no strong push for members of the board to put a position out there, I'm certainly, in contact and saying, I think this as a person. What you send to the board, we will become part of our definition. Just like this triaging of complaints, that one directly affects us. We brought it up. I think Carol put it before council a while back, and we will be getting somewhere there because it's already been moved upon, even if it wasn't part of this official discussion, because we had interest in that as individuals, but eventually it does overlap with what we do. So I wanted to bring it up because it's the kind of stuff that goes on in the community that overlaps in the space that we move in. It influences and maybe even defines it. And so I encourage everyone to still be attentive as to what gets finalized, at minimum because it affects what we do, but hopefully because we are interested enough to learn what's going on and express our opinion.
Ricardo, are there certain sections that you're referring to, or?
Actually,
I'm just wondering if there may be more appetite to do what we just did with the ordinance, particular sections might
yeah.
be.
So because it's probably gonna go to council before our next meeting, I wanted to give us a chance to do so. I am attempting to find, I had downloaded it and it's not in my folder. Well,
yeah, I guess I don't know. Every time I read the ordinance, if you're referring to our ordinance,
well, not ours. It is what's being proposed, the section on enactment, enforcement. Let me.
Okay. Well, I wanted to make. I didn't know if that's what Mr. Allegretti was referring to.
No, I just meant taking it on a particular section of the use of force policy, whatever is being proposed.
Right.
Yeah. Let's bring it up. I know there's the section that was that was giving us, 10 shared principles. Report. Here it is. Well, there's been lots of public comments. It's not coming in by a search, so I have to go down. I know it's towards the bottom, towards the end. Supervisor responsibilities, medical considerations. I'm not bringing up reporting use of force. That's when the police report it. There is a section here that talks where it ends up, because at minimum it comes back to us as a complaint of somebody not following policy.
I agree to back what Scott said about this new bill. I'm starting to read through it right now. And I think there's going to have, there's going to be a good portion of that is going to impact whatever the use of force is in Urbana. So I'm just wondering if we want to discuss maybe particular sections, but if we're not going to be able to do that before the next meeting, is that because they're voting on the?
Well, it's coming before council in not this one, the next one meeting. Given that the state law is going to supersede some of it, we may table it until after everybody has read through what the state law says. In fact, that is probably the most likely situation. They'll bring it up, they'll decide to table it until they see how it fits and make modifications for it and put another round of comments. So,
in the current thing, all I can see, I mean, the thing I've got down the wire that I like the best is the ACLU NAACP draft, which, maybe some of you guys have seen that's been distributed. So Ms. Spindell and Pearson and their group have done some work, and they cite a section that might be added to their section 10, which is entitled Duty to Report Use of Force, and suggest that there could be kind of an insertion of the CPRB. I think they imagined through the complaint process. It feels to me as if what we receive, although we have been prompted by the community and, we still actually need to review a use of force taser incident that we had extra video for, that we get a lot of reporting about that already from UPD. I mean, we have every individual officer's report of the incident. We have the video cameras and the BCWs or BWCs, excuse me. So I don't really know how I would change Section 10, Tony, right now in reference to that. But there's probably more creative minds than I that are working on that. So.
Oh, so there you go. So these sections, as they're written, may still change. And two, they built in a way, the fact that we will end up with certain cases, and there are many that may not come before us because they're dealt with in other ways within the police department. It is only when they come in as a complaint that we would end up with doing that. And well, if nothing else, we have had experience with either viewing it as the chief, finding the report, or disagreeing with them. So, not to stretch out tonight any further with that, I just want to make sure that we as interested members are there, and I don't hear a particular action from us yet, and so it's there. I'll move from new business to old business. Or pending business, so we'll all be more informed for next time. Okay. All right. So that would conclude our new business. I want to make sure that we cover the announcements before we invite the public to add more to it. I have had, Carol wasn't going to be here, so we dialogued about what that meant and not put Lamont in the situation of responding to things that were not his. So she put in some notes as to where we are. For example, here, the date for TASER reviews is something that we have had pending for a little while. The one that you mentioned, Scott, but it's also the availability that we have in our regular meetings. And at least, let me see, maybe two Tonys and Katrina have never done a TASER review, right?
No, I don't. No, I have not.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest there is that we get you through some of the training. There was a section prepared, and that you guys go through that. And as we're looking for dates to get together, and it may be as soon as our next regular meeting, if you guys get that training, then it'll be easier to have uniform, so you know what to expect when we review tasers. To clarify, we used to review, and when we wrote the ordinances, Scott was there with
Searles.
Pearls. We put in a period of, I think, 1 year in which we say we're going to review everything, or something like that. And we did that faithfully. In fact, that took up most of our meetings for a while. Last year, it came up to us a suggestion that maybe we shouldn't be looking at everything, especially in view that we had body cameras now. So that was part of the justification, but it was a change of our practice. And therefore, I just want you to be aware that as you guys go through training, it hasn't always been like that. And our circumstances are now subject to change should we choose to. So, and if you will, that's also part of maybe structural change. Do we suggest that we still view all use of tasers? There's usually not that many, thankfully. But I learned enough to change my mind over that. So anyway, so instruction, you guys, you should be contacted, or you need to email Carol and say, when am I being trained on tasers? So we can come back and choose that date. Okay?
Yeah, I guess I would just comment, if I can, Ricardo, the ordinance still says display.
Yeah.
So this is another case where the ordinance, needs some editing because it's an error.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would love to get back into a conversation because I missed that meeting where displays were voted down due to illness. And as we were talking about trying to help people understand, I would just like for new members to be able, to look at a couple of displays, but also to see some discharges. We've had a half a dozen or so. I mean, I wrote a report about it, but I don't remember the number right now. And so you guys could get a flavor for what actually happens when, the thing goes off and, the probes.
As I recall, Scott, you volunteered to be tased so that you would know what it felt like?
Oh, no, I didn't. No, I thought you did, Ricardo.
I'm just saying, that's part of the training on how significant they are. But yes,
Well,
I did volunteer. They didn't take me up on it.
Officers that go to PTI have to agree to be tased. They tase each other. I have witnessed that as part of the 10-week course I did with PTI.
I have seen lots of videos about that and what happens to people, and I don't want
As long as we don't have to do that.
Well, I forgot to tell you, you signed up.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Only for the new guys. We get
Yeah.
Yeah, sad. So anyway, so that is part of what's coming up. So please take your training, and we can set that date with doodle that was sent out to you all. Going on to the next announcement, 2 CPRB vacancies. You saw that Daryl had resigned. So this is our group for now until they get, until applications are done and they're reviewed by the mayor, interviewed by the mayor. In the last several, we have been invited to be part of the interview process. But again, it's gone back to the mayor. Somebody's comment said, why is it on her? Well, right now, that's how it's written. Again, one of those things that if we choose to do structural changes, that's where it would go. Structural or at least ordinance changes. So anyway, so I don't have an update. I have not been invited to a new interview, and I have not yet been notified of the last interview, where it's at. I have asked. As far as C is concerned, Lamont, I don't know if Lamont, I don't know if you have another update on whether the equity officer has been. I look at my notes.
Yeah, there are no updates. No one has been hired at this point, so they're still working that process to fill that position.
Okay, so I imagine by now that Carol had said that there was a short list that they were working on for scheduling them, but we don't have one yet. I asked early on how much are they paying, but they said that was out loading. So, anyway, announcement number D, or letter D, we have narrowed down as far as our doodle poll for either March 12th or March or not the 19th. Please pencil them in.
Hey, Ricardo.
Yeah.
I did have a chance to speak with Carol about that, and she said certainly it is up to the board which one they decide, but the 19th showed to be a better date. More people were available. It's also a date the hearing officer is available, but certainly it's up to the board.
Thank you. So we have 5 votes, but I want to make sure that the person who put in the appeal is available. So I will ask. Maybe it's not required by ordinance, but man, I hate going to court in that kind of system, because if you don't show, that's it, right? And lawyers have a way of stalling things. But in our case, we want a fair shake, and so I want to make sure that the claim, I don't know what it's called, has a chance of helping us decide. So for me, please set aside both. Do I hear a preference for you guys? The 19th looks like the doodle poll said. Any problem that we go first for the 19th and maybe second tier the 12th? Okay, so that's the way I'll take it then. Our first choice is the 19th and then the 12th. If the claimant is available for both, we'll go to the 19th. Okay. All right. And then our next meeting will be on the 24th of March. Again, we have split up the meetings into hearings and into regular meetings. Regular meetings feel like it's kind of issues today, which is denser. There's more homework. Well, there's different kind of homework. The hearings, we still have to read the cases and prepare, but this particular meeting is only one. There we are. At some point later, after we've made our proposals for changes, we are only required to meet quarterly. So if we work really intensely, we can vote ourselves to say, okay, we've done the major part of recommendations. Now we'll only meet every 3 months. And we can do that. Okay. All right. That covers the stuff that we had on the agenda. We will next go to public participation.
Ricardo?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, before we do that, I thought I overestimated. So my draft report to City Council from, I think it was April 20, that Searles and I did together indicated that we had 3 taser discharges. not a half a dozen. So
not half a dozen. So
I'm a
three.
little shaky on that number. I just used one that I thought was reasonable, but I may have been high by a factor
Yeah.
of two. So.
And because we're only reviewing discharges according to practice right now, then while we get many views of it, it can be a one session. It would be part of our regular meetings, however. So, okay. Thank you for that. I think the comment was made again, and I think it's true. So we have all members of the board here, and on screen we have Tamara, who does all our staff for meetings, staff work. Lamond is here, and then the technical. As far as people attending, we have Tracy Chong, who will be our first public input for this section. And then we have 3-4 other people that are just observing that have not raised their hand. So we'll go with Ms. Chong first. And as our last speaker, will be first. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Tracy, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Tracy Chong from Urbana. First, I'd like to say that I appreciate that you guys realized the damage that was done regarding trust in the board and the process when confidentiality was breached. Second, I would like to say thanks again for having this second session. You guys are the only board that does it, and it is so helpful to hear the board's discussion and hear you guys talking and kind of join in and give opinions in the end. So I enjoyed hearing the discussion whether a felon or ex-police officer can serve on the board. And I'm glad that you guys think that the no felony requirement should be removed. One thing that was not mentioned, or at least I think was not mentioned, was that an ex-police, regarding whether someone involved in law enforcement can be on the board. I think that an ex-police officer or even a retired police officer would still have ties to the police department. For example, all his colleagues will still be there. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes we spend so much time at work that our colleagues are just like our second family. So I just don't think that because a police officer is retired or has left the police department, that those ties and loyalty can be so easily cut. And I think there will always be an asymmetrical bias. So I think it should be that the no felony requirement should be removed, but I don't think an ex-police officer should be able to serve on the board. Finally, I'm going to bring up the 2019 taser incident again, where the unarmed man was tased without warning from the officers. And I noticed that you guys just mentioned it, but yeah, this is the case where Deputy Chief Searles only gave the shortest bit of video, and then you guys asked for more video. And when Searles finally showed more footage, there were immediately many questions, especially from Mr. Allegretti and members of the public who watched it. I guess I was wondering why this case has not been reviewed, but I think you guys mentioned it towards the end. But what I'm going to say is that I think this issue is particularly important because this is an example of how a review board can be less effective if the police side is not providing transparent and information to review and no one is holding them accountable. I've talked about it many weeks with City Council, but especially since they're discussing the future of the use of force policy board. So you guys, the CPRB has direct experience with how important certain aspects of a use of force incident like this taser incident can be missed if the police officers only show selective footage. So what I really hope is that if any of you board members found the incident questionable or find that this is an important issue to make your opinion known, talk to City Council members, give public input, because obviously they're not listening to my public input. So finally, I think if the board is going to compartmentalize or categorize complaints, everything should be transparent and recorded and decided by you guys, the board. More importantly, this filtering cannot be done by city staff. Don't forget that before the public started bringing up complaint issues, the complaint process was pretty messed up. You guys could not see the complaints, had no idea what was going on, when in reality, city staff was denying complaints. So the average number that everyone throws up, like, oh, the number of complaints in the past years is this number, it's not even accurate, because we do know that some complaints never even made it past the city's gatekeeping. Okay, have a good night. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chung. A lot of good points there, and we appreciate also your agreement. The taser issue, we've been preparing so we can do it all together. It is part of the reason why we should be trained. All of us should have experience enough to ask the right questions to get it all on the table. So I think that was not only prompted by you, but a good thing that we can do it thoroughly. Okay, the others I think we're already going through. Christopher Hansen did ask, and he will be our last. Thank you.
Are you just checking if you can hear me okay again? Cool. So yeah, Chris Hansen back. And also, again, thanks for doing the second public input. I think that helps a lot. I just wanted to agree with what was just said about the complaint count. I brought this issue to your board, and I know some of you are newer members, but I brought this issue to your board in 2019, that you guys were not getting all the complaints. And my impression is that there are probably lots of complaints that are administratively denied through all manner of administrative trickery. And we saw this same thing happen in Champaign, where they just accepted complaints and said, oh, we didn't know it was a police complaint, even though it was submitted on the official form and said complaint 7 times. So I wish you'd stop leaning back on those previous numbers and acting like they're real, because we know they're not real. I mean, I've seen complaints denied myself, and I documented it several times. And so I don't understand why we're pretending. And so now we're basically talking about putting this administrative snubbing process back in place when that was the problem that led to all of this in the first place. I mean, why do you guys think you got so many complaints in 2020? What problems was that drawing attention to? And now that you're back on track, what have you gotten, like 1 complaint per month for the last 7 months or something like that? So I wish you'd kind of ask the question of how did we get here and why a little bit more, rather than just looking at it in a problem in and of itself. And I think we all know the process is not smooth. The appeals process, everything, it's really, really bumpy, and it needs practice. It needs exercise. So there are some benefits there to having those appeals. So if someone asked me, I would tell them just totally steer clear of this process, because it's painful. It doesn't work well. It has all these administrative obstacles, and it doesn't provide any satisfaction. And maybe we can fix that, but I don't think providing more administrative obstacles is going to get us there. I completely agree with everything Scott Dossett said and the others said about the prior conviction history issue. That should be off the ordinance. It's not just that it's wrong in itself. It's a violation of our human rights ordinance, which specifically says that we can't discriminate against people for prior conviction history. So I don't know how we reconcile that when we have another ordinance, a stronger ordinance, actually, our human rights ordinance, which says you can't do it. And I would go further and take away the other part that talks about prior affiliation with local law enforcement. I mean, Mr. Allegretti used to work for the public defender's office, and I don't know if that part of the code would make it so that he can't be a member, but he's brought one of the most valuable perspectives of a new member lately. So I think you should get rid of all of that. I think the issue you could come in with putting police officers or past police officers on the board is not so much that they were police officers, because that's a useful perspective, but that it's extremely unlikely that you have anyone in Urbana who was a police officer who doesn't have direct affiliations with other Urbana police officers. I think that would be the issue there. So, and as a reminder, I mean, there is an interview process for getting on the board. So I don't see any reason to put up obstacles for anyone. Mr. Allegretti brought up the issue of, honesty or trustworthiness. And, I don't know that those character traits have a particular correlation to criminal history at all. I know plenty of dishonest and untrustworthy people who don't have a criminal history. So you have to flesh those things out in the interview process anyway. So And then I would encourage you, the motion you made on this issue, to also send it to the Human Relations Commission, because it says right in your ordinance you're supposed to work with them on issues, and that's right up their alley. And discrimination is what they do. So, and last, about the whole confidentiality thing, I think it's clear there are areas where that issue goes back and forth. And I want to draw, and I hope you'll give me just a little more time. I want to draw a distinction, a difference between, say, revealing confidential information about private information or a complainant versus revealing information about the ongoings of let's say the police component of a closed session, where your board, you are public officials in a way, you're board members, and then everyone else in that room is a city employee or a police officer. Well, I struggle to see why we really need to have a lot of secrecy about that. I mean, when you have 10 public officials in a room talking about something, there might be some privacy concerns there, but as far as the details of how that goes on, the problems that arise, there are problems with keeping that all secret. And so I think we need to talk about that a little bit more. And the situation that kind of has brought this to a head maybe is, what do we do if an appellant is in a closed session and they feel that something went wrong in that closed session? And, who do they talk to? And then if you guys can't talk about it, we basically just have a never-ending conflict that can't be solved. So we need to figure that out, I think. And then the last thing I'm going to urge you to do is to talk about the types of votes you have for the appeals. There's like 5 different options, and I feel like the board kind of stumbled on that. So maybe just put that on a future agenda or something. Thanks.
Thank you. I think especially that last point is true. We have struggled, and that's part of how can we make it more open in the ordinance so that we are, so that it's easier to vote and it more accurately reflects what we're voting for. So yes, we have noted that one too. And for me, this board and seeing how you guys discuss and then eventually vote, to me has given me a lot of hope for both fairness and where we live. We are the final vote when it comes to someone's complaint. It's not, it is an important power, if you will, that we hold. And I feel it does need confidentiality so we can argue with each other and see the best of the information that's presented us. I don't have any intention of opening that further, because the vote is the final vote on somebody's complaint. If there were an appeal after us, maybe you record and pass that on. But I would want that each one of you has full freedom to analyze the information and then vote without any repercussion except your best judgment. So that's just a quick answer to some of what was done. Thank you very much for coming tonight, for holding on with us. Everybody, we are making progress and we have taken a step back, but we will hopefully, as you said, with more practice, we don't just walk, we can run. And I have faith that we'll do that. So I'm ready for a motion to finish.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Scott.
Second.
Thank you, Tony. And let's vote on that, please. You can go home too, Tamara.
Tony Allegretti,
Yes.
Ricardo Diaz,
Yes.
Scott Dossett,
Yes.
Katrina Kendall,
Yes.
Anthony Rice.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We are hereby adjourned until either the 12th or the 19th when I do the hearing. Take care, everybody.